What's up, War Report family? It's your guy Ike Jones, and we are back with another edition of a bunch of stuff. We know we're broadcasting live over here on the War Report channel, the Auburn Express, and Just a Sec Pod. Ike Jones in here, and today we are talking about Vanderbilt football. That's right, Vandy is on the schedule for Auburn this season. If you've been living under a rock, I'm not going to pretend like I am the Vandy expert here. So, to talk all things Vanderbilt football today, we've got Will Byrum from the Door Report. The War Report meets the Door Report today. It sounds like a lot of alliteration and assonance going on there, but all good, man. Will, how are we doing today?
Doing good. Inching closer to football season. I think we're 32 days away from the first full Saturday of college football and 30 days away from the first SEC action. So we're closing
Yeah.
in the dog days of summer and getting into talking season. So I'm
It
doing
is
great.
that time. Fall camps are starting up all over the country. We really only care about the one starting in the Southeast, but they're starting all over the country here this week, and a lot of great high. This is the time for high expectations, and everybody being like, "This is the year where we turn the corner." Unless you're Georgia football, you're saying this is the another year where we just roll over everybody, right? But everybody is in there wishing for the best mode right now. What is the general sentiment from a Vanderbilt fan? We talked a little bit before we started this recording about experiencing the pain of fandom, right? But what's the general sentiment about this Vanderbilt team going into the 2024 season?
I've done a few of these podcasts of different fan bases throughout the SEC, and I wish I had an easy soundbite for those expectations. So I kind of have to take it back. It's Clark Lee's fourth season
Yeah.
as the head coach of Vanderbilt football this year. Year one went 2-10, was left a pretty awful roster from the Derek Mason tenure in 2021. Then went 5-7 in year two, so that would have been 2022. Went 5-7, took a step in the right direction, and then took a huge step back to square one last season, going 2-10. So the expectations are cautiously optimistic. A lot of roster turnover, 53 new guys on the roster, new offensive coordinator, new defensive coordinator, new offensive line coach, new strength and conditioning coach. So a lot of turnover here on West End, but expectations are do better than 2-10.
Yeah.
I think, to put it in simplest terms right now.
All right. So yeah, I mean, last year I was one of the people before the season, like, oh man, there's no way Vandy doesn't make the over. It's at 2.5. They came out of the gate, won the first two games of the season, proceeded to lose every other game for the remainder of the year. I was completely stunned. Now, injuries to your starting quarterback will do that. So it disrupted a little bit of what they wanted to do from an offensive continuity standpoint. And the backups just didn't really get it done last season for Vanderbilt. You lose some playmakers in this offseason, but you get some playmakers back in. The Vegas line again for Vanderbilt is at 2.5 going into the season. Before we get into the full Vanderbilt schedule and then subsequently into the game Auburn versus Vanderbilt that is going to be coming up on week 13, just kind of how do you feel about that over-under number? Is this the year where, go to Vegas right now or go to your favorite booking site, right, and say, give me the over on Vandy at 2.5. They're going to at least get to 3 wins this season. Is this the season for that?
So I don't know if you're a big gambling guy or
Not
anybody
a big
listening out
gambling
there,
guy, but, we have some gambling stuff on our channel, so I talk enough about it to pretend like I am.
So I'm a big gambling guy.
Okay.
So for those out there, the over under number is being put out at 2.5, and
Yeah.
that's getting all the attention and headlines and tweets. The odds on that over 2.5 number are like -190.
Mm,
So you're not getting the normal payout of a -110. That means that the books are really close to bumping that number up to 3.5.
right.
But really, it's stuck in 2.5. So for every $2 you put down, you're basically going to be getting $1 back.
Right.
I'm pretty confident with how the schedule plays out this year for Vanderbilt that they're going to hit that over number.
Okay.
And at a minimum have 3 wins. They have 3 very winnable games on the schedule: Alcorn State, Georgia State, and Ball State. You never want to say guaranteed wins when it comes to Vanderbilt football, but those are 3 games that Vanderbilt should be favorites in.
Okay. Okay. I mean, listen, I think that this season for Vanderbilt is again, I think last year I really thought Vanderbilt was going to be able to get to the over. This one, you've got the cupcakes, as you said, on the schedule. But as far as the Power Five schedule for Vanderbilt, week one, you open up against Virginia Tech, right there in Nashville, right? So it's not as if, how's the stadium construction going? I think I listened to one of your pods, and you were talking about how it always seems as if there is scoreboard and technical issues going on there at Vandy Stadium. But how has the construction of the stadium been? I went to the game last year there in Nashville. It was still a construction zone out there, cranes holding up scoreboards, all that kind of thing. But where are we right now with that?
Yeah, you mentioned the cranes holding up the scoreboard. For Auburn fans that didn't make it out there, that was a hell of an experience to see that. It was very, very bizarre. They got through the season. So this has always been planned that the full stadium renovation would be done prior to the 2025 football season.
Mm,
Right now, the north end zone portion of the stadium renovation is planned to be done prior to this season. So the north end zone, but the south end zone, where that scoreboard was being held up by the cranes, is not going to be done prior
mm.
to the season. So it should be about 60% done, a lot more put together overall with the stadium, but there's still going to be some construction going on throughout the season.
Okay, so not gonna have like the risers on one side that are still that look like a parking deck situation over there on one end, but the other end still kind of an open area where the cranes are with the scoreboard are going to be happening. But so that's what the Virginia Tech Hokies can expect when they come to town week one of the season to visit Vanderbilt. Then you get Alcorn State in that second game, one of those games where you said likely going to be a win, right? I don't see any reason why Vanderbilt can't win that game. And we'll talk about some of the personnel changes and things that have happened. You've already mentioned the coaching changes. We'll talk about those things in a second. Then your next game is at Georgia State, right? So realistically, going into Missouri game, Vandy could be 2-2, right? Week 4, you've got. I mean, I don't know how good Virginia Tech is, right? I have no clue. That could be a winnable game for Vanderbilt. I have no idea. But at worst, you would assume going into the bye week, week 5, Vanderbilt's 2-2, right? At worst.
Yeah, at worst, I think Virginia Tech is one of those teams. It's one you look at and say, why did Vanderbilt schedule this? I know it's years in advance that these out of conference games are scheduled. Virginia Tech is one of the most experienced has one of the most experienced returning rosters in the country.
Yeah.
I've been reading some ACC previews and different things, and Virginia Tech's one of those kind of sexy under the radar picks
Right.
to vie for that ACC title. So that's a tough week one matchup for Vanderbilt, an 11 a.m. kickoff as
Mm.
well. So going to be one of the first games kicking off on Saturday. But Virginia Tech is a very, very solid team.
Okay. So yeah, I mean, listen, 2-2 going into the bye week again puts you in a position where you only got to get one more win to get that Vegas over as it's set right now. But just out of curiosity, because some people thought I was crazy when I said, are you a believer in the Missouri Tigers this year? I know we're talking Vanderbilt Commodores. Are you a believer in the Missouri Tigers this season?
To be honest, don't know enough about their defense to fully say believer or non-believer. I think anytime you have Brady Cook and that receiving core that they have, that offense is going to be able to score and pretty much score with anybody. So I don't know if I'd fully say a believer, but I think they're going to be pretty damn good this season and shock some people within the SEC. Just because, in general, when you hear Missouri, you don't exactly put them up there as one of the top schools or top football programs in the SEC.
Right. And that was really my question about this Missouri team is how good is this defense going to be? Defensive coordinator moves on from there. They lost 2 or 3 of their best defensive players during the offseason. Is that team going to be as stingy defensively as they need to be to beat some of the teams that are going to be able to maybe not stop, but slow down that high powered Missouri offense? So we'll see how that goes. I said the next game coming up there for you guys after Missouri, after the bye week, is going to be Alabama. You're hosting them there in Nashville. A lot of question marks about this Alabama team, but listen, the talent's going to be there on that squad. So, if I'm putting a projection in, I'd say that probably is an L right there on the schedule for Vandy. But how are you feeling about that next couple of games, right? So you got Alabama, and then you're on the road to Lexington playing Kentucky. How are you feeling about Vandy's chances in either of those?
To be honest, the SEC schedule, especially coming off that Alabama game against Kentucky, I don't know what to expect from Kentucky this year at all.
Right. Yeah.
So I'm putting that one up as a possibly winnable game. It was just 2 years ago that Vanderbilt went into Kentucky and got a road SEC win for the first time in a while. Um, as a Vanderbilt fan, you kind of have a different view of the SEC schedule. The raw talent, but gap between Vanderbilt and Kentucky is always going to be less than against most of these other SEC opponents. So I'm never taking Kentucky off of the winnable game checklist just because
Okay.
the talent gap isn't going to be as severe.
Yeah, makes sense to me. I'm definitely not upset at that thought process. I am one of those people as well who is like Kentucky's was one of those teams where I don't know how you predict what a Kentucky team is going to look like. They're going to have a decent defense just because that's what Stoops is known for doing. But it's going to be the offense. Is the offense going to be competent this season? They've got Brock Vandergrift over there now, the transfer quarterback. How long is it going to take him to get acclimated to what they're asking him to do and really get some good chemistry going on with those receivers? He's been there through the fall. So through the spring. So that's going to be helpful. But how quickly can that offense get going? And do they have a competent run game to be able to complement if he's not going to be the guy that people thought he was going to be when he entered from high school headed down there to Georgia? So yet to be seen on that. But once you get done with that, you've got Ball State. And this is, the one where if all else fails, this should be win number 3 on the season for Kentucky. Home game versus Ball State, night game there in Nashville. And then you're welcoming new to the SEC, the Texas Longhorns, into town after another opportunity to get a little rest with that Ball State game. Hopefully, things go smoothly for Vandy during that game. You get some guys rested during the second half so that you can go full guns blazing there versus Texas. How are you feeling about the matchup against Texas?
I've made the joke a couple times, but it's on Texas because the all-time record for Texas against Vanderbilt's 8-3
Right.
against Texas all time. So
Right.
Texas has to close that gap. All jokes aside, obviously Vanderbilt's going to be completely outmatched when it comes to talent against Texas. So that's another one of those that I'm sitting there and just kind of hoping that no key guys get injured and Vanderbilt can get out of there looking relatively competitive. But at the same time, that's why they play the games.
Right.
You gotta kick the ball off and play 60 minutes.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Next up on the lineup here is the game at Auburn, traveling to Jordan-Hare Stadium. Now, this is a game that last year wasn't super competitive up until late. I mean, they made it interesting late in that game. But early in that game looked like Auburn was going to run away with it. But you do have, which we haven't talked about, but now is the time to talk about, Diego Pavia, the transfer quarterback coming in, who engineered the win versus Auburn when he was playing at New Mexico State last year. The offensive coordinator from that New Mexico State team, Jerry Kill, the head coach, now an analyst on staff with Vanderbilt. And if you listen to Clark Lee at SEC Media Days, I was there at SEC Media Days, got an opportunity to listen to him talk. He talked about the reason why Jerry Kill was someone he always respected him, but one of the reasons why he wanted to make sure when he heard Jerry Kill was going to be leaving New Mexico State that he at least put the offer out there was because of the performance of how they handled things at New Mexico State visiting Auburn last year. What is the sentiment you think in that locker room in terms of the ability to sneak a win in the SEC versus the Auburn Tigers on the road?
I know this is an Auburn podcast. This is not what you want to hear.
I
That
want to hear the truth. That's what I want to hear.
That Auburn game is definitely going to be circled on the schedule for not just the Vanderbilt players, but Vanderbilt fans as well. Is probably the most winnable SEC game because Jerry, you already did the research. You took a lot of my talking points for this Vanderbilt Auburn matchup, but you mentioned that kind of an under the radar acquisition for the Vanderbilt staff has been bringing over Jerry Kill, the head coach at New Mexico State last year. Obviously, you mentioned the 31-10 victory that New Mexico State had against Auburn last season, but Jerry Kill has had some health issues.
Right.
Otherwise, he would still be a head coach at the FBS level. And Clark Lee has taken over the defense, so he's the new head coach / defensive coordinator. So bringing over Jerry Kill has allowed him to kind of transfer a few of those responsibilities over to Jerry Kill, some more of the admin stuff, some things on the offensive side, so that Clark Lee can focus solely on the defensive side of the ball. But Diego Pavia is one of the headliners from that New Mexico State roster that Vanderbilt brought over, but they also brought over Eli Stowers,
Right.
a very solid tight end for New Mexico State. Brought over a couple New Mexico State running
Stowers
backs. So
actually was the backup quarterback as well for that team. So he played like some wildcat quarterback for that New Mexico State team that year.
Well, funny enough, Vanderbilt also brought over New Mexico State's backup quarterback in
Mhm.
Blaise Berlowitz. So pretty much this offseason, and it's happening all across college athletics in general, but it seems like a lot of these kind of struggling power four programs now that I still got to get used to saying that,
Right.
not power five, but a lot of these struggling power four programs have kind of chosen a program that was successful at the non-power four level and kind of pillaged their roster. And for
Right.
Vanderbilt, that's been New Mexico State. And obviously New Mexico State in a lot of capacities has the roadmap to beating Auburn. So I think that's why that's going to be circled on the schedule as a target for Vanderbilt to get a victory.
Yeah, which is completely fair. I think it's completely fair to say, hey, we've seen portions of your roster, the brain trust that you put together, go into this very same environment last season and get a win. So there is some optimism that with SEC caliber talent, you could go in there and duplicate that with the people who engineered that entire thing. And I think, on the opposite side of that, from the Auburn side, I think that's the big thing that's going to be looming in the minds of the players of like we can't let this happen 2 years in a row, right? Like we absolutely cannot get upset at home by a team that is coached by Jerry Kill, quarterbacked by Diego Pavia. That we just can't let that happen, right? And so I think there's going to be a lot more intrigue around that game than there typically would be for an Auburn Vanderbilt matchup, just because the storylines exist that allow people to have these types of conversations about the what if scenario. What if Vanderbilt's able to pull off this upset? As far as on paper, this upset. So yeah, again, I'm not mad at you. You're feeling that way. Listen, if I'm sitting here talking about Georgia, I'm gonna. Last year, people thought I was crazy. I was like, man, I don't know. I think that maybe Auburn's gonna give Georgia a scare. It's gonna be the first road game for their new quarterback over there, and it can they. And lo and behold, that's a game going into the fourth quarter. There's nothing crazy about having a scenario in which you can see your team going out there making something happen during the preseason. So not mad at that at all.
There's also something very, very odd. I know it's the new setup of the SEC, but Vanderbilt playing Auburn 2 years in a row.
Yeah.
Just something about that feels wrong to me is in my core as an SEC fan.
It's very weird. I mean, like, you're used to, as, an Auburn fan or a Vanderbilt fan, seeing that team once every like 8 years. You'll get a matchup against them. But listen, and this, it wouldn't be the first time that Vanderbilt was able to sneak a win against Auburn, right? Like, it's not unheard of. So the Auburn team is going to have to come out there ready to play in that football game. Now, yeah, if I'm looking at season projections for Auburn, I am chalking that one up as a win because I think Auburn should win it, but not mad at you saying that you think that Vandy has a chance in that, considering all the things that we just talked about. What do you think is the path for Vandy to get that win, though? Right, like, what does it need? Is it going to be? Because listen, that New Mexico State game wasn't particularly close, right? Like, I was there at that game watching Auburn struggle to move the ball down the field, and New Mexico State seeming to kind of just, every time you thought you had Diego Pavia bottled up, he'd make some sort of crazy throw happen, run for a first. Like, he was a magician out there during that game. Um, do you, without having, again, this is preseason, we're projecting way out. They haven't even touched a football in a regular season game, but would you see it being something like that where they need to jump out early and then just maintain a lead, or is it hang around and shock them late type of thing?
So obviously we're projecting
Right.
way out, and
Yeah.
Vanderbilt's being extremely tight-lipped about what they're going to be trying to do this season because, like you said, they brought in all the new coordinators, brought in all the new players. I'm going to give a bit of a boring answer. I think it's going to be pretty much the same answer for Vanderbilt securing wins this entire season. I think it's going to be dominating time of possession.
Hmm.
Last year, that was the number one thing that Clark Lee pointed out, and they struggled with last season. They were 93rd in the country last season in time of possession, I believe. and I think New Mexico State was like 26th.
Yeah,
And
That New
Vanderbilt
Mexico
also,
State game run game was like top 10 in the country for the vast majority of the season. So they were able to crank out yards on the ground consistently and just get crucial third downs and keep drives alive. Yeah, absolutely.
yeah, you stole my next talking point. I was just going to move into New Mexico State's run percentage compared to what Vanderbilt did last year. Last year, as a percentage of their overall plays, Vanderbilt ran the ball 111th most
Hmm.
in the country. So they were a very pass heavy attack last season. New Mexico State, on the other hand, ran the ball 39th most in the country. So Vanderbilt's going to have a clear emphasis, just projecting all conjecture, but
Right.
Vanderbilt's going to have an emphasis on that run game and time of possession. So I think controlling the ball, controlling the clock, and limiting the amount of time that Vanderbilt defense has to be on the field.
So who's going to be the guy that's going to be the engine for that run game, right? Like who's the guy that Diego Pavia is turning around and handing that ball off to consistently?
So I think it's going to be mainly a two-headed monster with possibly a rotational third head coming in there. But Vanderbilt has two very talented sophomore running backs coming off freshman season: Cedric Alexander, number 28, and AJ Newberry. I think he's still number 46. Those two guys are really talented, had solid freshman seasons last year. But I think it's going to be a running back by committee situation for the Commodores this year. So you're not going to be able to key on one guy.
Hmm.
Another kind of tidbit, Vanderbilt also brought in another quarterback in Nate Johnson,
Right.
who played at Utah
Utah.
last season. Yep, he was a former four-star recruit. He was utilized at Utah in a lot of package situations.
Right.
So very, very athletic guy, a lot of speed, a lot of arm power, but not a lot of accuracy. Haven't seen him throw the ball consistently in games. So Nate Johnson's another guy that I could see being utilized in that run game and in a different capacity than just that stable of running backs.
Yeah, listen, if they're going to use the New Mexico State formula, that is a portion of what they did last year. You know, Auburn fans get upset when I talk about how, uh, or well, actually, football fans in general talk about the fact that if you don't have, if you have two quarterbacks, you don't have a quarterback, right? But New Mexico State and that offensive brain trust were able to put together an offense that could utilize both of those quarterbacks in very unique ways. But it's really more so about how you and when you deploy that sub package, and they did a really good job of that. So I think. Props to Clark Lee and his staff. He talked about his recommitment to NIL, or the organization's recommitment to NIL and trying to bring in quality talent, and the recommitment to the strength and conditioning program of making themselves be more competitive week in and week out in the SEC. But props to them of figuring out how to put together a collection of athletes that fit well with whatever they want to do with the offensive strategy. And that's going to be crucial for them being able, like you said, to eke out some wins. Is just like, hey, just don't give the ball back to them. We're gonna play keep away for the vast majority of this game. So if they're able to execute that, and a lot of that's going to be on the offensive line, then they've got a good shot to be in whatever game that they're in. Because I actually like Clark Lee as a defensive mind. So him taking a bigger step forward as a defensive coordinator, I think is going to pay dividends for that Vanderbilt football team.
Yeah, I mean, Clark Lee, that's his background, coming from Notre Dame. Probably a guy that if he didn't attend Vanderbilt and play fullback at Vanderbilt in the early 2000s, Vanderbilt would not have had an opportunity to get. Obviously, his first 3 seasons as a head coach have been a struggle. I
Right.
think, in a way, I don't want to say this because every coach knows what they're getting into. He played there, he knew what he was getting into, but he bit off a lot.
Yeah.
And I think at a certain point he bit off a little more than he could chew. I think him being able to focus on the defensive side of the ball and the detail-oriented part of that he's so good at, I think the Vanderbilt defense could surprise some people this year. I'm not so sure about the offense. There's so many new moving parts, so much new that hasn't really been tried out in the SEC that we don't really know about. But I think the defense is going to be able to surprise some people this year.
Listen, running the football and playing good defense has been a recipe to be able to win football games since the inception of this game. It's not going to ever go away. Now, you might not be a championship team, but you can go out there and be competitive in every single game if you can control time of possession and get the ball back to your offense consistently. That's just how it works. All right. After that Auburn game, you move over and you have South Carolina at home. Um, and then you finish off on the road at LSU, which is crazy to have that night game at Baton Rouge to finish off the season. Um,
We do
it,
have Tennessee after that, but
uh, Yep, you do have Tennessee after that. I did not scroll down one more game after that. So yeah, Tennessee after that LSU game. Excuse me, that is going to be an early game. Talk to me a little bit about that. Tennessee versus Vanderbilt. Like I know I got a little taste of it when I was in Nashville for the SEC tournament a couple of years ago. And you're seeing kind of the Vandy flavor there in Nashville, but then you see all these Tennessee fans in basketball. Is it contentious between Tennessee and Vanderbilt there as an in-state rival?
Yeah, I think it's one of those rivalries that's more contentious than even a lot of Tennessee fans would like to admit.
Hmm,
There's obviously the football programs historically have had very different levels of success.
right.
The Vanderbilt baseball program has been historically, outside of this last season, more successful than Tennessee, and the basketball programs have been relatively even outside of the last couple of years.
Right.
But you felt it the most when in that Tennessee Vanderbilt rivalry. There was a stretch from 2016 to 2018 where Vanderbilt won three straight of those matchups against Tennessee. That rivalry has some juice to it.
Yeah.
So it's a unique rivalry. Vanderbilt's obviously the smaller fan base, the only private institution in the SEC, and you're just 3 hours away from each other. And there is a large contingent of that hideous, ugly orange that does reside in Nashville
Yeah.
and comes into that stadium. So it's a unique environment. If you're a Vanderbilt fan, even here in Nashville, you grow up and 70% of your friends are Tennessee fans. 15% are Vanderbilt fans and 15% are fans of other SEC programs. You're definitely in the minority. We are mighty, but we are few. Or we are few, but we are mighty.
Yeah.
Messed that up. But it's an interesting rivalry for sure that does have a little more juice to it than I think most people recognize.
Yeah, like I said, I definitely felt the vibes there when I was at the SEC tournament. I was like, oh, I don't think these guys like each other very much, man. Like, being an outsider, I don't have really the context, and it's not one of those highly publicized rivalries like the Iron Bowl is, where it's like Bama and
Yeah,
Auburn fans don't like each other.
it's got some unique stories and historical significance to it. Like there's the old story that the reason that General Neyland was hired, that Neyland Stadium was then named after, he had one task that was given to him when he was hired as the head coach of Tennessee football, and that was to beat Vanderbilt.
Hmm.
That was the reason he was hired and the one reason or the one goal that he was given. So there's a lot of historical significance to it, and it's been going on for a very, very, very long time. But yeah, like you said, it doesn't get near as much recognition just because of the lack of success on the Vanderbilt side, to be completely honest.
Makes sense to me. All right, so give me floor and ceiling here for Vanderbilt this season. Like the wheels fall off. At worst, we're here. And if everything goes the way that I think it can, and we get some breaks here and there, where do you think Vanderbilt can land this season, floor and ceiling, with their schedule?
Okay, so I always like to give two. So I think the floor and ceiling stuff is overutilized by people, and they're not truly giving the true floor and true ceiling. They're giving more of a realistic floor and a realistic ceiling.
True.
So the true floor for Vanderbilt is 2-10. I
Hmm.
think that's the absolute worst case scenario. The realistic floor, I think, is 3-9.
Hmm.
I think they are going to win those three games that I pointed out earlier. I think they're going to beat Alcorn State, beat Georgia State, beat Ball State. Obviously, I'm not 100% confident in that, but I think that is the true floor. I think the true ceiling at its highest peak is a 7-5 season for Vanderbilt. I think the more realistic ceiling is a 6-6 season,
Okay.
and becoming bowl eligible for the first time since 2018. So I think I would say 3-9, 6-6 are the floor and the ceiling there.
So with that floor and ceiling, that means you're going to get your three non-con G5 and lower wins, right? Or FCS matchups, right? So who are the three P4 teams that you say to yourself, we could sneak, well, 3 to 4 of those teams that you have as tentatively? We've already talked about Auburn. You've got that one circled as a maybe on the schedule. But who are the other, I guess, 2 or 3 teams that you're saying to yourself, this could be one that we sneak up on?
Okay, so you already mentioned Auburn. I would say Kentucky, like we talked about earlier. I think that talent gap is always significantly less than some of the other matchups that Vanderbilt has on the horizon. I want to say South Carolina,
Mhm.
just because the talent level is not going to be significantly of a big gap. But Vanderbilt's cursed against South Carolina. If you go back to 2021, they're cursed. So I'm not very confident in that one. I would point out Virginia Tech
Mm.
as kind of an opening barometer. I know that Virginia Tech's supposed to, I think their over under on wins is 7.5 or 8.5 this year. They're a very, very talented team, but it's week one. Week
Yeah.
one, 11 a.m. kickoff. Anything can happen. I think that's a sneaky game on the schedule. But yeah, Kentucky, South Carolina, Auburn, and possibly I would throw in there Virginia Tech or Missouri. But those three, Auburn, Kentucky, South Carolina, and then one of those two others, Virginia Tech or Missouri.
Gotcha. Gotcha. Okay. Well, we will definitely keep an eye on all things going on in the SEC. And of course, we over here with the Auburn fandom are going to have to keep a close eye on how Vanderbilt's doing so that we can either be breathing a sigh of relief that it's still falling apart in Nashville or saying to ourselves, okay, man, you guys got to strap up and actually go out here and get this dub. But we will do that. At the appropriate time, we'll revisit this conversation during the season. But Will, I appreciate you taking some time to get in here and talk with us about this and kind of hip us anything that you've got going on with Vanderbilt. Tell the people who this might be their first time hearing you, how they can keep up with all things Vanderbilt over there at the Door Report.
Yeah, so we're most active on Twitter. If you want to follow us on Twitter, our is at the Door Report. We also have the same handle on Instagram and on YouTube, so you can look us up on there. We record during football season and basketball season every single week. During the off season, we've been doing every couple weeks. But if you're looking to get any Vanderbilt coverage or follow what's going on with the Vanderbilt fan base, follow us on Twitter at the Door Report. That's where we're most active.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, once again, Will, we definitely appreciate your time today. We're going to get out of here, but you all know where you need to check out things that we've got going on. We're the War Report on all our social media. If you want to follow us over on TikTok, it's TW Report. We're at you on YouTube at the War Report. We're here as the Justice Sec Pod and as the Auburn Express on your podcast platforms. Make sure you check them out. But until the next time, and as always, War Eagle.